What's going on, everyone? It's GadgetsBoy. Welcome to another video. In this one, we're going to be comparing the cameras on the S23 Ultra and the 1-inch sensor on the Vivo X90 Pro. These are meant to be the best camera on the market right now, arguably, especially this one. But I'm excited to see how well this compare to each other, how they compare. So, we're out in London. It's a sunny day. It's a beautiful day. Let's go check it out.
To kick things off, let's start with the camera specifications. So on the Vivo X90 Pro, we have an IMX989 1-inch 50 megapixel main sensor at f1.75. This is also in collaboration with Zeiss. We have a 50 megapixel portrait camera at f1.6 and it's an IMX758 sensor. We have a 12 megapixel ultra wide angle at f2.0. It's IMX663, which gives you 108 degrees field of view. On the front, we have a 32 megapixel shooter at f2.5, and that gives you 24 millimeters wide. Over to the S23 Ultra. If you haven't seen any of my videos already talking about the specs, we have a 200 megapixel f1.7 main shooter. It gives you 24 millimeters wide, and it has PDAF, laser autofocus, and OIS as well. Then we have a 10 megapixel f4.9 aperture, periscope, telephoto lens. We have a 10 megapixel f2.4 70 millimeters telephoto lens in there as well, both with OIS, and gives you 10 times optical zoom as well, and then you get that 100 times space zoom, which we'll look at as well. We have a 12 megapixel f2.2 ultra wide angle, which gives you 120 degrees field of view, so a bit more than the X90 Pro. This has pixel PDAF, dual pixel PDAF, and super steady video as well. And on the front, we have 12 megapixel f2.2 aperture, which gives you 26 millimeters wide field of view here, which also has dual pixel PDAF as well. So if focusing on all that stuff, it's in the bag for the S23 Ultra. Okay, we have loads of pictures to go through, and I think there's about 30 items to go through in total on both to compare them with. So let's start with the photos. So to make things easier to understand and to know which one's which, all the Vivo shots will have the caption on the screen at the bottom, which says Vivo X90 Pro, Zeiss, etc. But in case you miss it, S23 Ultra shots will be on the left and Vivo shots will be on the right side at all times. So back to the shots. This first one, I wanted to try out some of the grayscale in terms of a grey day, a day that's not sunny, shiny, beautiful, etc. So this is the main lens. And on the left, as you can see, they both look good right off the bat. It was difficult for me to actually differentiate between these two in terms of quality. I think to the naked eyes, they look really good. The only difference is here is the fact that we have different color reproduction. So when we look at the saturation on the images, so if you look at the grass on the left side on the picture behind the car or around the car, you see that the grass looks a bit more saturated and the tree looks a bit more saturated compared to the Vivo X90 Pro. The weird thing though is I feel like the X90 Pro picks certain colors to make pop. So if you look at the trees, for example, the trees look like the actual tree trunks. The colors are popping on the right side of the car compared to the Samsung one. But I think overall they both look good. The dynamic range is good. The blacks, the white area, the grey area, they look really good as well. One thing that the Samsung's trying to do though is opt up when we have the grey background on the sky. Sorry, in the sky, is trying to give you a good separation between the green on the trees and the actual grey on the background. So almost like artifacting, but not too much. It's not doing that HDR too much there, which is really good. I think they both look good overall, and it's just a matter of preferences here. Let's look at some ultra wide angle shots. So here we have ultra wide angle shots. And for me, in general, really, ultra wide angle camera lenses are not that, they don't usually produce good colors. But I think here, considering it's a flat day, they've done a good job on producing good colors on both cameras. So if we look at the way everything's just set here, the colors are good, the grass are good. The only thing again is Samsung always go with that extra saturation on the color. But for me, the Vivo looks a bit more natural, is what I can see with my eyes on the day. But for something that you want to pop and share straight away on social media, then you might pick the Samsung. But again, this is just down to preference. But on this one, I would say the Vivo for me is better. If you look at the grey on the car alone, for example, the grey looks darker. It's nicer. The contrasts are better. Whereas on the Samsung, I think things looks a bit, I don't know, just a mishmash of color popping and a bit, the grey doesn't look that dark in terms of dynamic range. So again, here for me, I'd go for the Vivo. Next, we have optical zoom images. So If we look at the Samsung on the left here, things look natural as well. On the right, things look natural. But obviously the differences are the zoom range. So on the one of them can do 2 times, 3 times, etc. But I've picked a sweet spot in terms of zoom here to see how the colors are reproduced using that telephoto lens on here. So we're not using that 100 times space zoom or anything here. It's just a standard zoom on both. And you can see there's a lot of detail retained on both. They both look really good. The alloys on the left side for the Samsung looks more shiny, so the chrome is standing out more compared to the Vivo here. But again, just a matter of preference. I think saturation is down the Samsung versus the Vivo, so it's just a matter of looking at it and going, which one do I prefer? But I think they both produced really good images. This is going to be a difficult comparison throughout the whole video, so buckle up and we're going to decide which one we prefer at the end. But I think so far so good. They're both producing really good shots. Next, let's look at some selfie images here, and straight away you see that the Samsung looks much better here in terms of the detail and the way it doesn't smooth out my face too much, which is really good. The Vivo on the other hand, you can see the way it tries to smooth out my face. Beautification was turned off on both, so rest assured these are the same settings, similar settings if not, and you can tell, look at them, the Samsung just looks better. There's a bit of sharpening there to retain that detail in there, which is absolutely fine. I think if it's not overdone, that's okay to do. But the Vivo just smooths things out here. If you look at my facial hair, you can see how it's there's no separation really between the grain of the hair strands. So I'd go for the Samsung one here. Okay, next, let's have a look at some selfie portrait here. So this is just a selfie portraiture that's been taken in the studio. Both blurry effect or bokeh effect set to the maximum that you can get. And as you can see, the Vivo has a better blurred out background, so there's less things in focus. But weirdly, if you look at the plants just by my hoodie, it looks at it and think they're the same thing. So it keeps that in focus. So the digital processing here, it confuses lights. It's like similar colors rather than light. Sorry. We look at the Samsung, thing looks more natural. My hair, my face is how it is. The skin tone, the colors, the lighting effect from the left side of my face coming from that side, and the shadows on the right side looks really good. Separation looks good as well. I think on both separation is good in terms of the hair right at the top, but this just depends on what look you're going for. I think if I'm going for something that's more natural, I'd go Samsung here. But if I want something that's ridiculously blurry, I'll go for the Vivo. But the good thing about both devices is after the fact on the phone, you can change the level of bokeh, the level of blurriness, so you can adjust that accordingly. So, but it takes the whole subject, try and separate them as much as possible. And I think here, I'm going to go Samsung because it just looks natural, and reality is it looks better to me. But the Vivo looks a bit softer. If you look on my face, there's, I don't know, colors are all over the place. So for me, Samsung. Next, let's look at some low light photography. We're going to look at this from on all the lenses. So this is the main one that we've got here. So as you can see, I think, again, they both produce really good colors, really good lighting on there, even the foreground and the background as well. So if you look at the car door card there, you can see the brightness on both. The Vivo is trying to compensate here for the darkness and making it a bit brighter on the door card. So if you look at the bottom left corner, you can see the difference there. Then we look at the main imagery itself. We can see that it's illuminated everything without making anything look natural. This is purely trying to make things as bright as possible here. And it might be the Zeiss effect, who knows, but we're just going to look at it as what we see in front of us. The colors look good, apart from on the Vivo, the blue on that left, on that arrow sign on the roundabout looks really good compared to the Samsung one. I think for me here, I would take the Vivo for the low light photo here. I think that takes it home. Everything looks really nice and bright. I could perhaps tone it down afterwards and edit if I want to edit it. But the Samsung seems to think the only area that needs illuminating is where it's already bright, which is those traffic lights, which I don't think makes sense. You should try and illuminate everything. But again, just a matter of preference. And you might look at it and go, Samsung looks better to you and looks more natural. So it depends what look you're going for. So if you're going for the more natural look, the Samsung takes it. If you're looking for something that's actually bright, out of the camera, well lit and illuminated, I'm going to go the Vivo X90 Pro here. But what do you think? Let me know in the comments. Okay, still sticking to the low light situation here, talking about telephoto lens. You can see the differences here. So the devil is in the detail in terms of how accurate the highlights around the light bulbs on the traffic light. This is how I'm going to judge this and how noisy it is. So if you look at the top right corner, the Samsung looks a lot more, it's got noise there. There's a lot of noise going on. compared to the Vivo X90 Pro. So straight away, I'd say X90 Pro here for me takes it home. I think if you look at each individual lights on the traffic lights, the highlights around it looks really good. It's kept that on the check. Whereas if you look at the Samsung, it's a bit blown out. If you look at those red lights, for example, and the brighter colors, they're just a bit blown out. So I'll give this one to the Vivo X90 Pro. Next up, still on the low light situation, we look at the ultra wide angle lens. Again, ultra wide angle lens on phones, for some reason, they don't always perform the best. But I think here we can see the differences. I think X90 Pro looks good straight away for me. Again, we talk about the highlights, how it's just overblown on the Samsung. If you look at it, you can't, it just blows it out on the traffic lights. And then we look at the X90 Pro, sorry, it keeps it in check. It's really nice and well illuminated all round. The colors don't look washed out in terms of the sky. It's actually grey rather than the Samsung is looking a bit blue, greyish, bluey tint to it there. So it's trying to overdo that saturation, which in turn affects the quality of what it produces with the lighting. So I think X90 Pro here takes it home for me. Next, let's look at some color reproduction. So this is very important because when you see a color with your naked eyes, you want to say, okay, this is red in terms of that red tint there, but how does that reproduce itself when you look at your photo? So first of all, there's plenty of colors here to look at. So we start with that main red one. So the red one pops a lot on the Samsung here, whereas on the Vivo X90 Pro, it looks a lot more natural. That's the actual red that I could see when I took this picture. So because this red takes over a lot of the photo, it's very bold, Samsung just makes it pop. And depending on what you like, if you prefer the saturation, maybe that's what you want. But if you want something that's natural and real, I'd go for the X90 Pro on that color there. Then we look at the writing at the bottom left where there's this little warning sign. I think here Samsung makes it again brighter so you can sort of read the text, but on the Vivo X90 Pro it looks a lot more natural. Looking at the guy wearing the pink looks more saturated on the Samsung compared to the X90 Pro. We look at the purple on the lady just behind that guy wearing the blue jacket. It's darker on the X90 Pro, but brighter on the Samsung. So maybe the Samsung is just trying to make things a lot more brighter. We look at the guy in front of the guy wearing pink, looking to the right of him. His skin tone looks more orangey when we look at the Samsung compared to the X90 Pro. So I think overall, the Samsung is just trying to make things look more saturated. And on the Vivo X90 Pro, things looks a bit more natural, although the blacks in there can be a bit questionable. If you look at the right and rights at the top left corner on the E, that letter E, on the Samsung looks a bit more darker on dynamic range. And then on the Vivo X90 Pro, looks a bit more grey. So do with that what you will. But I think they both do a really good job. It's just a matter of preference again here. Let me know what you think. Next thing we want to look at is your landscape photography when it's a better day in terms of brightness, the colors, the way they look. And straight away in front of us, we have the Samsung looking very, very saturated. And on the right side, things look a bit brighter and just a bit washed out towards the end of the far end of the photo. So if you look right to the far end, the sky looks just a bit washed out, whereas on the Samsung, it's more blue. It looks nicer. Even the river is looking darker as well. So dynamic range for me looks better on the Samsung. When we look at the Vivo X90 Pro, things look a bit more, I don't know, just washed out a little bit. But what do you think? Up next, let's look at some portrait photography using a main camera. And what do you guys think straight away? Drop some comments below. Look at the shoes. For one, the shoes looks better on the X90 Pro. I think that color is a lot more darker. So that's the color that my actual trainers were. And then we move up slowly. We look at how it looks. And the Samsung looks brighter, but the X90 Pro looks a bit darker, which is more true to my skin tone. So I'd give it to the X90 Pro on this one. I prefer it. I think it looks much nicer. Let's punch in though and see what they look like in terms of the edges and how separated they are. So if we just zoom in on the X90 Pro there and we zoom in on the Samsung, we can start to see details here. So you can see the way that it separates my face on the Samsung. It's not bad at all. I think it's done a good job there. We look at the hair. The strands look really good as well. Even with the lights popping on top of my head, it still makes it look good, which is fine. I like that. And then we look at the X90 Pro. We start to lose detail. Look at my facial hair. It's just, I don't know what's going on there. It's starting to look like an oil painting. The details are becoming to get lost in the mix. And then we look at the jacket as well towards the right. He's struggling there to separate the black on the jacket compared to the backdrop on the background compared to the Samsung there, which does a really good job at separating those. Let's use the telephoto portrait lens here. Let's see what that looks like. Okay, so we're looking at the portrait lenses now, which means we zoomed in a little bit. We haven't, as in we're using the zoom lens here to try and get the best shot. Right off the bat, they both look good. I think they're fantastic. Good separation on all grounds. You can see it. The blur looks near enough the same, but looks better on the Vivo X90 Pro, I think. It's a lot more blurrier on the Samsung, but I wouldn't base your decision on this because you can change that after the fact anyway. But something interesting here, though, is if we zoom in on the Samsung, we can see that things aren't fully in focus properly. Things look a bit more blurrier in terms of, it looks like my hands were shaking, but they weren't. Or it's picking up the micro movement. But that aside, let's look at the Vivo. The Vivo is interesting. Look at what it's done to my facial hair. It looks like some sort of oil painting going on here. So if you look at this too, we can see that the Samsung is trying to keep the detail in there. It's trying to keep the detail in check. But we look right above my head. It's a bit chipped in, which is not correct. So separation here, there's a bit of struggle there, but still does a good job at trying to keep them as separate as possible. We look at the Vivo X90 Pro, oil painting galore. Look at it. Look at my hair. It's just smoothing things out for no reason. And there's no smoothness turned on or anything like that. So beautification, all that stuff, not switched on at all. But I think, again, which one looks pleasing to you guys? Which one would you post on your social media? I think the one that's more realistic here is the Samsung one versus the X90 Pro. But one thing that the X90 Pro does do well is my skin tone. It looks exactly how it should be. The pores on my skin, just the way it looks, it's really nice. It's just the hair that it messes up when it comes to the hair. It just smooths them out. It's like straightening them. I don't know what's going on there. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Okay, next up, let's look at some high resolution pictures. So the X90 Pro can shoot 50 megapixel. The S23 Ultra can do 200 megapixel pixel bin, both pixel bin, by the way. But what I've done here, instead of shooting at 200 megapixel, the S23 Ultra can also shoot at 50 megapixel. So to make it fair on both, we're going to stick to 50 megapixel here. Because once you go beyond that, I think it's just just as good on the phone anyway. But right off the bat, they both look really good. As you can see there, loads of detail on the actual lines on the building. The reflections are great. Everything looks very, pretty much as realistic as it can be. There's lots of detail retained in there as well. What we want to do now, though, is zoom in on them to see how much detail we can actually retain. So as you can see there, X90 Pro is looking good. You can actually see into the office buildings there, just where it says St. Mary Axe. We go on the Samsung. We'll see if we can get the same level of detail in terms of that St. Mary Axe. There we go. And we can see that they both retain a lot of detail in the writing. So if you were to post this after the fact, you're still getting a lot of information there. Where it wins it for me, though, is if you look at the X90 Pro, it does a better job at detail around the actual lines. So if we look at that CCTV, the black one next to the St. Mary's Axe, on the Samsung, it's a bit blurry. But on the X90 Pro, it's a bit more defined, which is pretty cool. If you look at the CCTV as well around it, it looks a bit more defined on the X90 Pro versus the S23 Ultra. But I think they both do a good job in general. So if you want to punch in afterwards, you can still do that. The writing's still very legible and very easy to see. There's no problem there at all. There's not a lot of noise in there as well, which is incredible that this is coming from smartphones. I think they both do a great job here, and I'm not going to say one's better than the other. I would say they both do a great job. Let me know what you think. Next up, let's look at some videos.
Now recording a video on the front-facing camera on both smartphones, so the Vivo X80 Pro and the S23 Ultra right there. So I hope you guys can see the differences. Smooth the hair around a bit. Look at the sky. A bit washed out. But I'll let you guys decide which one you prefer out of the two. They're both shooting at full HD 60 frames per second, which is what the Vivo can do at max. The S23 Ultra can go higher at 4K, but we're not going to test that or compare them because that would not be fair. So both devices have stabilization to different strength in different ways. So this is just their standard stabilization, so just a regular strolling, bit of jog. You can see the S23 Ultra just holds its own. It's very stable. They're not too bad though. I think they're both just as stable, really. It's really nice even when jogging there, jumping up and down. It's really good. Let's try ultra steady. So now we have ultra steady mode, so super steady on the Ultra. There's then ultra on the Vivo device. What we'll have here is both can only shoot that in 1080p, not 420. So you can see how stable they are there.
Next, let's have a look at some low light videography here on the main lens. So we can see what the focusing is like and all that stuff. So straight away, you can see the Samsung just struggles with trying to focus on what's at hand here. So the bike, as it goes past, it kind of struggles there to focus. And then we move on to the light. I can see it loses focus again. The Vivo X90 Pro is still doing a good job at keeping things in focus. So the Samsung is struggling with the foreground and the background in terms of focusing, which in this case, when the car's moving past, you want to say the car is the main action here to control the focus, but it struggles a little bit there with focusing, keeps going in and out of focus, is hunting. That's something to bear in mind. But I think focusing aside, the colors look great on both. I think regardless of where you're shooting and stuff, it will look really good. The Samsung looks better in terms of grey sky above, so it's a bit darker, whereas the X90 Pro just blows things into full brightness, illuminates everything, but not as natural as it should have been. But again, matter of preference in terms of the lighting, that, you know, how bright they are, which part you like to see being bright compared to everything else in the picture. But I think they both do a great job. Next in video, let's look at some focusing. How well does he switch focus between the foreground and the background when you're moving things? How well does it do with the white balance? So, as always, they're both still in their location. You can see there, we move from the pole, move to what's going on in the background. We move back again, and we see that things look really good. The way he switches, white balance is good as well. That's what you want from this. We look at it again and see what the colors are like. Dynamic range looks much better on the Samsung for me compared to the Vivo X90 Pro. So I'll give that one to the Samsung. But focusing wise, I think they both do a great job at keeping focus and white balance as you switch between the focusing range, the focal range. Bonus video here, we look at lens flare, and I think they both keep it as minimal as possible. There's more flare on the Samsung on the left compared to the one on the right for the Vivo X90 Pro. You can see the flare there on the Samsung, and then we hit the Vivo X90 Pro. You can see there's less flare going on the lens, which is probably to do with that Zeiss T coating that they've got on the actual glass itself. Lastly, a bonus one as well for you guys to look at. This one I'm not going to comment on this video, just let you guys watch it and see which one you prefer out of the two. So again, Samsung S23 Ultra on the left and the X90 Pro on the right hand side. Let me know which one you think wins. But overall, over to you though. Who do you think smashes it out of these two? Which one would you go for? The X90 Pro from Vivo or the S23 Ultra from Samsung? Which one looks better for you based on this video? If there's any question, drop them in the comments below. I'll do my best to answer those questions. I hope you've enjoyed this, and I shall see you guys in the next one.